All right, it looks like it's recording now. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining this meeting. In an ideal world, we all be at Three Barrel or the Windsor, enjoying beer and talking about this project together, or even better, out at the project itself. So hopefully, some of you guys have a Three Barrel beer or something with you, seeing that it's 5 o'clock and a nice time for that. But because that's not an option, I'm glad that this webinar was able to happen, and we can provide an opportunity to talk a little bit about the project and answer any questions and dive into it a little bit deeper. So just looks like everyone's already muted themselves just while everyone's presenting. If we just keep muted, and then when we have the Q&A, we can open it up and have any questions. But if you do have questions throughout, feel free to use the chat and just type it in or raise your hand, and we'll get to you. We can kind of pause and go through that. So with that, I think we'll just start off really quick. Chris and I will give a quick presentation, kind of some background on the project, and Chris will talk about the designs and the considerations that were made for the design of the Playwave and the project, and then we'll open up for questions. So here, start off, share my screen. Hopefully you all can see this presentation. And yeah, here's a lovely picture of the Playwave just a few weeks ago. It's already, those trees back there are so much more green now. But just again, thank you all for joining us, and just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Emma Reeser. I'm the director of the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project, and there we go. And just to give you guys a quick background, the Restoration Project is a nonprofit here in the Valley that's working to improve the health of the Rio Grande for all water users, for the environment and ag, recreation, and community safety. And we do this through partnership projects to implement multi-purpose projects. And the Del Norte Riverfront project is a really great example of that. And it's something we've been working on. And so the Restoration Project's role in this project has really been as a project manager, coordinator, helping facilitate grant funding, working with all the partners, and helping move the project along and make it happen. And so I'll give a background on the project, but then Chris Pitcher is our engineer expert who's been working on the project, and he can give more of the nitty-gritty details of the design. Just to give you guys a bit of a background, the project, Del Norte Riverfront project, really goes back many, many years to conversations around the community, centering around addressing community needs. Really those needs of lack of river access within the community of Del Norte, and recreation opportunities, economic diversity, and then also the Restoration Project, and had been working in areas around Del Norte to do river restoration work, but looking at ways we can improve the river corridor through the town itself. And so from those conversations really became the vision of the project, which is to create connectivity between the communities of the San Luis Valley and the river that sustains it, the Rio Grande, and doing that both through recreation opportunities and improved access, but also through improving the ecological condition and aquatic habitat here in town in Del Norte. And just wanting to give you guys a quick timeline overview of where we've come from. This really goes back to in 2008, the Del Norte Trails Master Plan identified that river recreation was an important need that the community wanted to address. And And additionally, the SLV Go master plan included that need as well, but for a valley-wide perspective. So those two documents really highlighted that this was something that the communities of the valley wanted to focus on. And then the restoration project really became involved in 2015 when the conversation was really picking up and partners were starting to come together to think about how we could make this happen. And so the restoration project joined in with those conversations and started helping with the initial planning and fundraising for the project. And so over the past several years, 2016 through 18 was really a lot of planning, community events, lots of community nights sponsored by Three Barrel and the Windsor. So shout out to those awesome partners. And lots of community outreach just with events like the Trails Showcase, 12 hours, lots of getting out and getting feedback from people on what they wanted to see with this project. And through all of that really led to the designs that you'll see Chris talk about. And those were completed in 2017. And then those permit documents, which took almost about a year to get done and to be reviewed and the public comment and all of that. So those were acquired in 2018. So that it was really quite a lengthy design process, and the design reviews to make sure the design was meeting the needs of the community and the river and all of those different components. And then finally, once we received the permits, we were able to begin construction. We started with the boat ramp construction because that's what we had funding for. And then in spring of last year, we received funding through Great Outdoors Colorado, which allowed us to complete the Playwave and additional river work and picnic park improvements that you see today. And then, of course, as you all know, if you haven't been out all over the winter, was when a lot of the construction happened in the river, which was really fun to see. I mentioned already, but the design process really involved a lot of community input. And from that community input, we really heard from the community that there was a desire for multi-use space. And just gonna, okay, we're good. Just wanted to check and see that if there was anyone else waiting to get in. So yeah, the community really told us that they wanted to see this as a space that multiple users could enjoy. So fishermen and boaters and families just wanting to get to the river. So that was something we really wanted to make sure that we were designing this in a way that the park and the river and everything allowed for multiple users and river access. We also talked a lot with partner agencies partner agencies such as Colorado Parks and Wildlife, as well, and then partners like Trout Unlimited and Del Norte Trails Organization, community groups, to really help us understand their concerns and interests. And so CPW helped us with the design of the fish passage, making that they were very interested in making sure the Playwave was fish friendly, fish passable. The fish habitat improvements were designed in a way that would benefit angling in that area. And then a design review was completed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, by the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and by the Army Corps of Engineers. And then just wanted to kind of highlight the permit process was definitely quite lengthy and included wetland delineation, biological and cultural assessments, engineering analysis designs, and then the water quality certification and public comment. And so we worked, CPW had some comments that were submitted that we worked with them to even further improve the fish habitat and passage. aspects of the project. And then just Chris will talk a lot more about this, but I wanted to just show, this is a picture of the overall design and the different features of the project. So the Playwave is kind of the focus of tonight's conversation, but it also included fish habitat improvements, stream bank stabilization, and riparian habitat restoration. There's going to be a picnic area and park amenities on the north side, as well as a parking area, and then some signage and pedestrian river access. So lots of aspects to the project. And then, of course, wanting to give a shout out to all the funders that made this project possible. I think we wrote our first grant back in 2015 for this project. And so it's been about 5 years of grant writing and working with funders to make this happen. And so huge shout out to the list of funders here, especially Great Outdoors and CWCB. Those were our biggest funders, but really every single one of these partners and community supporters like Del Norte Bank and individual donors from the community really helped make this happen. And then also wanting to list the project partners that have been involved from the beginning and helped move this along, make it happen. So the total budget is around $750,000 for the whole project, including the design and permitting and construction and everything from start to finish. Just wanted to throw in a couple pretty pictures. Here's the picture of the project site before construction. Here's a picture from just this April, right when construction was completed. And the CFS, the river flows at this point was just around 250. So you can see that's at like low flow. And then here's a picture from just last week where the flow is around 2,000. So, and there's Chris out there surfing the wave. And then just wanting to mention that the Playwave's complete, but we're still working on just finalizing the park amenities on the north side. So there will be an ADA accessible picnic area, parking area, and signage on the north side, and that is getting, the construction of that is getting going. Robbins Construction has been working on the picnic area, or sorry, the parking lot area over the past week or so, and then they're gonna get going on the picnic area here in the next week or so. So hopefully in the next few weeks that will all be wrapped up. And in the meantime, we are asking people not drive into the north side so that we, the construction crew and everything can proceed smoothly. And I wanted to just throw in our contact information for the restoration project. So following this, if anyone has any questions and wants to follow up further, they can let me know. But with that, sorry, I'm trying to maneuver my computer. With that, I think I will pass it over to Chris to talk more about the design itself of the Playwave.
Okay, as Emma said, my name is Chris Pitcher. I'm working with Riverbend Engineering over here in Pagosa Springs, and we were the engineer that did the design work for the Del Norte River Improvement Project, which had several different components. One was the boat access, boat ramp. The other was the whitewater wave feature, and then some habitat structures upstream of that. And I'm sharing my screen here with you all, showing just the project plan overview sheet from the design set, just to kind of show the different features of this. here's the Highway 112 bridge, and then the new parking area and boat ramp is located on the north side of the river, west of the highway. And these were lots that were purchased by the city of Del Norte for this project, and really made this project happen. Here is the location of the wave structure. And then upstream of that, there's a couple of deflectors and some habitat structures for enhancing the fish habitat in that area. Just some basics about the design. Emma touched on the permitting process, but it was a 401 permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, an individual permit, which is the more kind of lengthy permit process, includes several public comment periods and interagency reviews by pretty much every public agency that would have a reason to look at this, looked at it. But one part of the design that's important to remember is this was required to follow all the FEMA regulations for floodplain development. And so everything that we did, we had to prove that we weren't adversely affecting the 100-year floodplain. So the overall water surface before and after didn't significantly be raised as a result of this project, which created some design constraints. You can't just do whatever you want. You definitely have to make considerations for flooding and make sure that you're considering that in your finished elevations of everything, specifically with the wave feature. And the wave feature was constructed by basically taking the existing elevation of the river in that location, and that was the starting point. And then from there, everything was excavated down into the river. And as Emma mentioned, we didn't have discussions with CPW about fish migration through this stretch of the river. You can see this area here that's called out for fish passage. That was an important part of their review, is we wanted to make sure we weren't creating any kind of fish barrier. So when you look at the structure, you can see this area. It's lower than everywhere else on the structure, so that at the very lowest flows, it still has water and still is passable by fish. This is about 6 inches lower than the low flow channel, which is located on the northern side of the structure. It's about 2/3 of the way over from the edge of the water on the south side. And that was to kind of create a little bit of buffer between this fishing area and the fish passage area and where the structure was located. And also the way that the setup was, it worked better having the low flow passage area on this third of the river. And this is where the main heart of the wave is, and where the intention of the wave structure to form is. And it's basically a hydraulic jump. As the water speeds up and goes over the ramp of the rocks and then plunges into the pool area, it creates a hydraulic jump, which is a standing wave, which creates the hydraulics necessary so you can either kayak in the same place or surf in the same place. And so that's the basic idea of that. Just wanted to clarify too, it's never really the intention at the lower flows for the other areas that wasn't the low flow section of the ramp to be utilized for that type of activity. If it's really high flow, that may become an option, but at the lower flows, it's really shallow water, if at all, flowing over those adjacent areas. So the real wave structure is really located in that northern third of the river. That being said, we've done several of these over in Pagosa and other parts of the Four Corners, and there's always a little bit of tweaking that goes on. not so much with the structure that's built here, but this structure here, what's called the grade control structure at the bottom end, which is just dry stacked rock, which is easily adjustable, can make a big difference in how the wave looks on the ramp itself. So there is the ability to make some adjustments. The wave itself is rock and concrete, and so that's pretty fixed. There's other designs that are much more expensive that are dynamic, where you can make changes to the ramp itself with, you know, either pneumatic or hydraulic gates. But this is meant to be kind of a beginner wave. The target flow is, you know, between 500 and 1,000 CFS, which is kind of that middle summer, late summer flow when it's hot out, and, you know, you'd expect to see a lot of people wanting to utilize the river for a place to swim and cool off and hang out. That's basically the gist of the design. I'm sure there's questions, and it might be best just to get into any questions anybody might have, and I'll do my best to answer them, or Emma can answer them. And I'll stop sharing my screen just in case we want to look at photos or something else. Is there any questions yet, Emma, or any hands raised?
Awesome, thanks, Chris. Yeah, looks like we have a question from Tom on the chat. But it says, does anyone complain about the wave know how to surf? So that's more of just a philosophical question for us all. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about the designs? Or because I do think that's a good point though, Tom, that this is definitely something new for the community, and something that is going to take some figuring out by all of us, and especially those of us that aren't experienced in river and surfing.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to figure out this whole Zoom thing on my phone. So I'm a concern about the well, not concern, excuse me, just question about the size of the river, the boat access. You know, that looks like it can handle at least 2 rafts being pulled out at once. And you know, I know it had created a concern with the upstream canal owners, which hopefully have been resolved. So the boat ramp is the idea to have that so that it is a raft, I guess, launch if you're going downstream, or takeout coming out. Is that why it was built so large? Because it's way excessive for just to access a Playwave.
Yeah, I think this is Chris answering. The idea was, well, a couple of things. Certainly a launching point. We wanted it to be big enough where you could back a trailer with the boat on to launch it there. Historically, there's been use on the eastern side of the highway bridge, which is just a single kind of deep trail down to the river, kind of one lane in, one lane out. So if there was somebody in there, you had to wait till they got out before you could put in. So yeah, it could satisfy 2 trailers and boats at one time. And it also provides a place, if you're playing in the wave and you're done and you want to float down and get out, a place to get out. Certainly oversized for that, but still works. And then there was, originally this project contemplated more work upstream. The scope was reduced for a variety of reasons, but we felt like the access was still important to maintain that bigger size, and so it stayed that, and it didn't really. It's not a huge expense to. I mean, if you're building a boat ramp, if it's 2 lanes or 1 lane, it's not that big of a difference cost-wise. So we just made it nice and big.
Yeah, I think that Chris kind of touched on it, is like wanting to plan for the future too, as well, if there's opportunities to you know, down the road, wanting to make sure that it has the capacity for and it does create like a nice space for waiting and kids to play too. So okay, we have a couple more questions in the chat from Emily. Are there plans in the works to make the above and or below stretches of river more floatable and friendly by way of boat chutes at diversion dams or portage easements on private land? That's a great question, Emily. And I think that, you know, it's something that this project, the focus was really on the town property here at the town park, and recognizing that that was land that the town had access and control of. And then also the Del Norte Trails organization, like Chris mentioned, purchased those parcels on the north side so we could make it a both sides of the river project. And so the focus of this project really was on that, but I would say that long-term vision really is to improve boater safety throughout the area. And so at this point, you know, working with ditch companies and landowners is voluntary on those landowners and ditch companies' ends, but that's something that is really a long-term vision, I think, of the partners working on the river. As projects come to fruition in the future, I think that's something we want to make sure that we're addressing to make sure that the river is safe for boaters. But that's something that has to be done in partnership with those ditch companies and with the landowners, and would have to be voluntary. So hope that answers that question. Oh, Tom, do you want to add something?
Yeah, right now the current situation with the upstream canal company is that because a lot of us were getting hassled going around it this spring, they've agreed that they don't want people dropping and lining their boats over the dam. So the larger boats, which I've done for years personally, it's much easier to get those larger boats over the dam using ropes than to drag it around. So the agreement is that they'll, they will stop hassling people as long as people just walk their boats around. So you could spread the word for river users that's the case right now.
That's good to know that that making sure people are portaging around, even though it's more work. I know that's the concern of the canal company has always been safety at the site and liability. So that's really helpful. Thanks, Tom, for that information.
Looks like there's another question in the chat that I can answer.
Yeah, go for it.
It says, are there plans or intentions to clear some of the vegetation just downstream River Right past the fishing dock? At the higher flows, if tubers or kids want to get out River Right, they'd get pushed past the fishing dock based on my observations. And yes, part of what we designed was a improved river access downstream of the fishing dock. So now there's a rock stairway that takes you down to a calmer water area right below the dock there. And then the arm of the grade control structure that controls the pool elevation of the whitewater feature creates a little bit of an eddy and a beach. It's just opposite of the boat ramp. So hopefully that improves that and slows the water down so someone in a tube has plenty of time to ferry across to one side or the other, depending on where they're going. So at least that's the intention.
And then Brian also mentioned, he just commented that he's heard it throughout the project about the importance of fish passage, and that was factored into the design. But with a low head dam nearby that intentionally acts as a fish barrier, why was it so important? That's a really great question, Brian, and something we talked a lot with CPW about. And the Rio Grande Canal is what CPW considers that a terminal barrier for non-native pike. And so it's something that they see as an important barrier to protect the gold medal fishery upstream of that diversion. And so it is, I think the reasoning really from talking to CPW about the fish passage and wanting to improve fish habitat was that stretch, even though it is there is that low head dam and it is the terminal barrier, the fishery downstream is also incredibly good, and the trout fishing down there and through the town of Del Norte is incredible. And so that was something that we wanted to just really make sure that we were not harming that in any way, and making sure that we're making it better and improving habitat. And so to do that, that was where the fish passage came into being, and really wanting to make sure that we're not negatively impacting the fishery in any way. Even though you're right that there is a diversion upstream, wanting to really, the idea is let's try to remove as many barriers as we possibly can, and making sure we're not creating any new ones. And that's something that CPW really wanted to see happen. And Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's accurate. I know they did a fish survey of that section between the wave and the Rio Grande Canal, and they were pleasantly surprised on how many fish were in there. So they didn't want to cut that off. So.
Yeah, and that just goes back to the multi-use emphasis of the project, and wanting to make sure it's a great spot for anglers and boaters all together. Okay, another question from Kurt.
Yeah, I think it was just a follow-up, and absolutely we'll keep an eye on that. And if we do need to make some adjustments to that structure to make that a better eddy, we can do that. I would say also, though, that at 1500, I would not recommend tubing the river. I know the Rio Grande's different, but at least over here in Pagosa, the San Juan is the kind of rule of thumb with the local outfitters that rent tubes, is they won't rent them anything above, I think it's 350 or 400. So, you know, it's going to be different for the Rio Grande, you know, that because it's much wider and it'll be slower moving. But yeah, I would be targeting that maybe more around 700. It would be kind of, and it'll be something that'll kind of work itself out as people use it and determine. But 1500 is a lot of water and certainly powerful.
Yeah, you're right, Kurt. I'm sure there will be people that try it. That's for sure.
Looks like this is Heather, guys. Looks like there's a break of questions in the chat, but we did get some emailed questions, and wanted to maybe queue those up for Emma and Chris. Chris, I know you did discuss it when you were looking at the design, but I do think it would be worth some extra emphasis, because they're, you know, the way that the hydraulics looked the last couple of weeks with high flows, it did seem to have confused folks on what's what. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about just how the structure will change as flows change, and then just kind of suitable uses at different flows, and really emphasizing the design flows so that we can make sure that people really have a good understanding of your intentions with the design.
Sure. Emma, will you let me share my screen again, and then I can maybe point that out a little bit better?
Yeah, I think Heather has to do that. There you go.
Okay. So, as we talked about before, this river left side looking downstream is kind of where the main feature location is. And so as far as getting in and out of the wave, the intent was you would do that from the river left side eddy. And where this structure ties in to the bank here is slightly higher than the main channel section of that. So it creates an eddy on this side that kind of naturally feeds you right back to the structure. As the flows get higher, this becomes overtopped on the left side, and then that eddy becomes less and less strong. So I guess we were there at 2,000, the eddy's still there and you can still get in, but it's harder to get in. And as the water goes up from there, that will become more and more washed out, and it'll be harder to get into the structure. However, at least in my experience, just trying things out, floating in from above into the structure was no problem. At 2,000, I was able to float right in and then get into the wave that way. But at any rate, as the water goes up, the eddies become washed out and they're harder to get into. At lower flows, certainly this river left eddy will feed you right back to the structure, no problem. And the river right eddy will start to form kind of in between this low flow fish passage area and then the low flow ramp, which is right about here. There's another little eddy that forms that'll feed you over into that location. Plus, at that lower flow, everything's moving much slower, and it's a lot easier to ferry back and forth from one side to the other to try different places to get in. And at low flow, I think accessing the wave structure from above will be relatively easy as well. And there was, I guess, Heather, do you want to read? Maybe I think there was another comment about that. Maybe about
sure, Chris. I think you covered. There were some comments about a weak eddy, and I think that was probably due to people just with the structure being underwater, not being able to clearly see where the defined wave was. And so I think you've addressed that. But there were questions about or concerns about shallow rocks. And I think that does tie back into maybe people were trying to surf the fish passage, but that was kind of the follow-up question that we had received was just concerned that maybe rocks were in dangerous places.
Yeah, absolutely. So the picture that Emma showed, I think it was right around 500 CFS there. All of the water was going through the low flow passage, and the depth on the ramp itself and the low flow passage was probably between 10 inches to 18 inches, maybe even up to 24 inches as it got higher. That's the depth on the ramp itself, which isn't that deep, although it is moving fast. So if you fall into it, you certainly could, fall through that 2 feet of water and hit the rocks. That is definitely an issue, and it's an issue of all of these structures all over the Southwest, or really the country where these exist, is to speed up that water has to move faster, and when it moves faster, it gets shallower. It happens to you once, and you start to realize that if you're going to fall, you want to fall back towards the hole. But the low flow area is the place designed to have the greatest depth and be the safest as far as running into rocks. The other areas weren't really meant to be surfed on or kayaked on in a standing wave type scenario because of that depth. Although, like I'd mentioned, at really high flows, the whole thing may turn into a big wave that is accessible for, you know, more of the expert surfers. But certainly at low flow, you want to maintain, as it gets lower, it'll become really clear where that is. But like I mentioned, it's this kind of northern third of the river.
I think that's the bulk of the questions that we got by email, or, you know, we had got some others, but folks asked those questions. Looks like Kurt asked another question. Chris, can you talk about the recommended lowest flows for surfing the ramp? Concerned about hitting my noggin when I flip. Kurt, we don't want anything to happen to that beautiful noggin.
Yeah, you know, that's kind of still to be determined. But based on my experience, we've been able to surf over here all the way down to 400. And it wasn't, I mean, certainly it becomes shallower, but at a low enough flow, the wave really kind of starts to lose its strength, and it doesn't really have the energy to hold you up. So it kind of takes care of itself as far as if it gets below that, then it's you know, not that exciting to be in. But I will say that just turns into people swimming in the river. And, you know, that's, I think what you'll see at this location, if it's anything like other places, in the heat of the summer when the flows are low, it's a great place to go and just jump in and, you know, completely submerge yourself in cold water and kind of get refreshed. So, you know, you certainly want to be aware that you are still in a river and there's still rocks and flowing water, and it's, you know, there are hazards out there, but it's a great relief in the heat of the summer. Which also brings up a point, maybe Emma, you could just touch on this, but there is the plan to provide some informational signs on both sides of the river for people that are just unfamiliar with these structures or the river in general. Just some kind of tips about swimming in the river and, you know, some basic safety information, I think, will be really important. And yeah, like Emma mentioned, it'd be great to be out there to talk about all of this on the bank of the river, but someday we will, and someday those signs will be up that'll help describe that.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for mentioning that. There's an existing sign kiosk on the south side of the river, which we hope to add safety information and more details. And then there'll be an additional signage kiosk on the north side that will have, our hope is to have a map of the headwaters, the Rio Grande, and all the boat ramps, access points, as well as the Riverfront project, noting hazards and including safety tips and information specifically about the Playwave and such. So hopefully that'll help give people some safety information they need, but also recognizing that it is inherently, there's some risks with using the wave, and then you know, it's going to take some figuring out since it's brand new. And then, yeah, we have a couple other questions in the chat that I wanted to just go back to. Ben Billings asked about Chris just explaining a lower grade structure and how changes in the lower grade structure would impact the dynamics of the main wave.
Yeah, so that grade control structure below the structure, the wave structure, controls the pool elevation, which has a lot of effect on how the wave, the characteristics of the wave. The higher that structure is, the typically more meaty and foam piley the wave is, and the lower it is, the more it wants to clean up and be a green kind of tongue. And there is a variety of opinions of which is better. And so I really feel for those places that have the ability to adjust those all the time, because everybody probably wants it a different way. We can make those adjustments, but they would be kind of like on an annual basis, and then they would be stuck until the next time we could get in the river. Right now, it's kind of performing right in the middle. There's kind of a pile on one side and a green tongue on the other, which is pretty great. When I was there last, there was a kayaker that it was just passing through on the way from Denver to Durango, and he stopped, and he was able to kind of surf in both sections and gave some pretty positive feedback. So, you know, there is the ability to adjust that. There'll be a lot of different opinions, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's helpful, Chris. And then, yeah, we have a question from Rio about the vegetation along the river. Important to coordinate with the habitat conservation folks about southwestern willow flycatcher and vegetation removal. So that's definitely something that's an important piece of the project, is riparian, wanting to improve the riparian condition along the river. And that's not only important for habitat, but also for the stability of the structures. And so it's something that we've been talking with the town about, and will continue to, is how we kind of balance the importance of protecting the riparian habitat, as well as creating access points through the willows where people can still get to the river and spend time on the river, because we want to make sure that people can still get there and enjoy it, but also that those willows and the riparian vegetation along the structure and along the river throughout the site are healthy and good for the swiffle and all of that. So that's definitely an important piece of the project. And Rio, I appreciate you bringing that up. Just looking over. Yep, and this is Lola. I knew she was gonna come at some point, because she can't handle a Zoom call without making a presence. Awesome. Are there any other questions or thoughts? I think one thing we have a vision we have for the project moving forward is to have more community events and activities along the park and in the river. And Chris and I were talking the other day. He mentioned maybe the folks from Badfish and Salida could come down at some point and have demos. It'd be great to have an event where Brian and Kurt have Adams State Adventure Program come up and have crafts available, fun weekend activities with Three Barrel and the Windsor food truck and all sorts. I think there's a lot of opportunities for the space to be used, and for us to have a lot of fun with it in the summer. This year's obviously things are not, we had plans to do more of those kind of things, and that's not able to happen this time of year because of COVID. But definitely, if anyone has fun ideas like that, we definitely want to make sure the space is something that the community can use. And I think the picnic area and all that, those aspects will really help with those fun events. And yes, inflatable turtles, of course. Any other thoughts or comments?
Emma, I have to run, but I just want to thank everybody for coming. And if they do have any more comments or questions, they can send them to you, and we can certainly answer them.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, thanks so much for lending your expertise.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And yeah, definitely this is, I'll put our email address in the chat again, just so people have it, but this is definitely a chance for us all to ask questions and get information out there, but also just wanting to let people know that we're available. If there are other questions following this, they can shoot me an email and we can make sure we're getting those questions addressed. And we definitely want to know of any questions and concerns, because anything we can do to make it better and get information out is important. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, and hopefully we'll be able to enjoy beer out by the river here before too long.
Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Great to hear from y'all over Zoom.
Look forward to that beer. Thank you.